Welcome to another episode of Connecting the Lines. Natural disasters and extreme weather events cause a massive amount of destruction every year. But while it can take years to completely rebuild communities, power and communication networks are typically restored relatively quickly, within days or weeks, because they need to be. These are critical services that individuals and businesses rely on, not just to thrive, but also in some cases to survive. So how are utilities able to restore services quickly? Well, it takes a massive behind-the-scenes and on-the-ground effort to make it happen. So today, we're exploring this topic of storm response with two people who have over 50 years of combined experience in the electric power industry. We got Max Bohan, National Sales Manager for Energy Markets, over 10 years of experience in the electric utility industry. You quickly worked your way up through the ranks, started, I believe, a product support engineer.
Correct.
For the distribution products. You have a degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Case Western, also a master's degree in mechanical engineering and an MBA from Case Western. Some fun facts. So you once took a 1-year hiatus from watching TV.
I did, yes.
I don't know. I call BS on that. You didn't watch any sports?
I didn't. It was painful.
Wow.
And there's a longer story to that. Is that part of this podcast?
Hey, let's hear it.
Okay. So I have an aunt who lives in Denver, Colorado, and has worked for the wildlife service out there her whole career. And when I go visit her, we do fun things like fly fishing and hiking and skiing and all the outdoorsy stuff because that's who she is and what she does. When we stay at her house, she doesn't have many electronics. Just maybe 5 or 6 years ago, she got Wi-Fi. So I was out there one time, and she doesn't have, TV to watch the sports games or anything. And I said, man, how do you do this? You don't have any of the games on. She said, oh, it's quite nice. I read a book or, I exercise my mind or do something like that. You should try it sometime. And I said, I don't know if I could do it. And she said, if you do it a whole year, we'll have you come out and, we'll do something fun. And so I made it a year, and we went out and did about a week's worth of fun activities in the Rocky Mountains. And it was rewarding. But, there were times where I wish I could decompress and watch the Ohio State game or whatever it was. And I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't do it again.
That's cool. So speaking of sports, also the winningest player in history for PLP's Fantasy Football League. I love that you threw that in there.
Yeah.
So shots have been fired for anyone that's on that league.
That's right.
And we have Joe D'Amato, so currently Senior Sales Manager for Energy Markets at PLP. 45 years of experience in the electric power industry, including experience in engineering, manufacturing, marketing, and sales. Degree in industrial engineering from Lehigh University.
Yes.
MBA from St. Bonaventure. I did not know that. So that's by Holiday Valley, which I go skiing at. So I've been there quite a bit.
It's by Cooper Power Systems in Olean, which was the only show in town.
Okay. And you are claimed to fame. You're a million miler with United Airlines.
I'm actually up to about 1.1 million now, but yes. And unlike some of our PLP colleagues, I did it the hard way. Some PLP employees are able to rack up a lot of miles in a hurry by flying to places like Australia or Austria or wherever. I've never flown internationally for the company. All of my miles came the hard way, trips to Boise, Idaho, Butte, Montana, Oklahoma City, and it takes a lot more of those trips to hit on a million miles than it does if you're flying to Australia or New Zealand.
Sure. Including, you said you spent at least one night in every U.S. state.
Yes. And the only state where I've only spent a single night is Wyoming.
Okay.
And the other part of the fun fact is that the last state that I was able to rack up on my quest to hit all 50 was Montana, and I've been there 3 or 4 times since then. Montana is one of the best states, too. It's a very diverse topography, very cool people. And I've had some great visits there, all helping to support PLP.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So what is your favorite and least favorite state?
They're all my favorite states.
Okay.
Okay,
very political.
I have a theory with regards to travel. It's kind of like my theory that you've heard with regards to trade show. Every trade show is the best show ever. Every trip is the best trip ever. And you've got to start out a trip with a positive attitude. You've got to look for the best in every destination, at every account, because if you start thinking negatively about where you're going, it's going to impact the customer's reaction towards you.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's get into it. So today we're talking about storm response. So let's just start by talking about what do we mean when we say storm response, particularly as it relates to from a supplier standpoint.
There are any number of different types of storms that can occur that result in outages in power utility systems. And the obvious storms that people would think of would be hurricanes, tornadoes, ice storms, wind storms. But some sort of natural event that results in a condition that takes the electric power grid and the telecommunications grid out of service. We, in some cases, will prepare in advance. If we see a storm coming, it's sort of tough to predict tornadoes, but especially with regards to hurricanes, we see them coming, and it gives us the opportunity to kind of get ready in advance at PLP, the same way that the utilities will get ready if they have the same ability to forecast in advance.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, after a storm, or even before, we're talking about a massive coordination effort, particularly on the ground here, with some of these large staging yards that everyone's kind of seen. So, who leads that effort on the ground, and who are we communicating with? That's understanding what's going on. I guess I kind of envision it kind of like a military operation, but I don't know if you guys can talk to that.
Yeah, it can be, and it depends on what storm we're talking about and where said storm is. Hurricanes are amongst the most predictable and can be the most catastrophic. The preparation for those is very militaristic-like. As the hurricane gets closer to landfall, just using that as an example, you usually have a pretty good idea of where it's going to hit. I know there's a little cone that they forecast, but you have a pretty good idea of when it's going to make landfall and where it's going to make landfall, especially as you get closer to that time event. In our industry, you have utilities that are asking their distributor partners how they're planning. The utility itself can stock up on storm material ahead of time. The distributor's helping out as well. And then if we have enough visibility, in Rogers and Albemarle, we're beefing up our storm stock where it makes sense too. For the most recent hurricane, Hurricane Helene and Milton, we knew they were going to come in the Florida area and have most of their impact in the southeast. We have the ability with our reporting software to run sales reports and see what the high volume products are that we've sold, say, into the southeast over the 3 years prior. And we can make adjustments and manufacture products ahead of time to beef up for that.
Okay. So from, a supplier like us, from that standpoint, what's the biggest concern, or what do we most focus on after or maybe even leading up to a storm?
In some cases, it's manpower related. Storms hit nights, weekends. There are expectations in some cases where people expect that we'll be able to turn on a dime, get material out immediately. That's not always the case, especially nights, weekends, or weather is impacting the ability to ship out of our plants. The fact of the matter is we can have material in stock, but unless we can get someone to pick it up and deliver it to the site where it's needed, you have to complete all the links in the chain in order to get the supply on the ground where the material is required.
Yeah, and that was kind of my next question. I would guess that that's probably the most challenging is the logistics of everything. I mean, we can make stuff, but can we get it there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like Joe said, say something's available on a Saturday, we have to make sure that the freight bill is going to be worth getting that product to the customer, a mere hours in advance of the regular scheduled work week. Mm-hmm. If it is, if those extra 12 or 24 hours are worth it, then sure, we'll get the employees to come in on a Saturday or a Sunday. We'll get a dedicated truck to come in on a Saturday or a Sunday, and we'll get the product out as quickly as humanly possible if the situation calls for it.
Right. So, Joe, you've been in the industry for 45 plus years. So tell me, how have response efforts changed over that time? I would guess, there's a lot more data now, there's mapping, there's GPS. How has that evolved?
I think the expectation today in terms of being able to provide a quick response is much greater than it might have been 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Communications are better. The ability to track inventory is better. The ability to contact truckers is better. The hope is that all things being equal, the response today can be handled much more quickly than it could have been a generation ago. Telecommunications also presents some issues with regards to the ability to respond, and we have expectations that you can turn on a dime, where in fact, because of things that aren't electronic, things like truck availability or icy roads preventing delivery, our customers' expectations in some cases, they'll call at 2 a.m. and say, get this stuff on the road right away. Well, there's a lot of things that have to happen before the material actually gets on the road and on the way to the end destination.
Mm-hmm. When we're talking about actual work that's being done and repairs, are utilities doing Band-Aid type fixes, or are they actually going in there and thinking about long term?
I think the best answer is it depends. Depends on the circumstance, depends on the magnitude of the outage, depends on the amount of damage in that particular structure or span. In some cases, it makes more sense from the outset to just rebuild the entire line rather than to patch something together that's too severely damaged. Mm-hmm. So it's always tough to give out an it depends answer, but that's really the reality.
Yeah. Some of our formal product recommendations reflect that too. For instance, our formed wire insulator ties are one-time use only ties. However, we do say in storm situations when you have to get the line back up temporarily and you need something to secure that conductor in that overhead insulator, go ahead and reuse the tie even if it was bent up a little bit. It's going to perform better than the alternative. However, you need to make note of it and come back and permanently fix the construction when you're able to.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And one of the problems that happens is if you make a temporary fix and that's your intent from the outset, in some cases, reality turns out to be that it becomes a permanent fix. A good example of that is automatic line splices. The official recommendations for an automatic splice is you shouldn't have more than 1 or 2 per span. But I've seen cases personally, especially in rural areas where following storms and they're just looking to get the line back up as quickly as possible, you may find 5 or 6 automatic splices in a single span. It's not recommended. It's not it's something that's going to hold up well over the long term. But in a rural area that doesn't require or expect a lot of attention, it's good enough, and the temporary repair becomes a permanent repair.
Mm-hmm. So what about from PLP's perspective? How do we prioritize either products or orders for storms?
We're really good at doing that. That's something we've done for over 20 plus years, probably since Joe started here 23 years ago. We've always prioritized storm orders. I think the industry as a whole is pretty good with that. That's not really unique to PLP, although we take it just as seriously as everyone else does. When a big storm hits and lines are down, that's critical infrastructure that hospitals and nursing homes and people that are susceptible to everyday life, they depend on power for the stuff that they need to live, right? That's the most extreme circumstance, but that's what we're thinking about when a storm hits, and the effort that we need to put into responding. There's people whose lives depend on it. So specifically, what does PLP do? We talked a little bit earlier about some of the storm-dedicated stock that we keep on our shelves, extremely high-running product that we know most of the utilities in the U.S. needs, right? So that's something that we reserve for storm situations only. But when we respond, we typically require that PO is a new PO comes in. It's specifically flagged for, say, Hurricane Helene response. We know what distributor it's shipping to. We know when it's going. We know that there's expedited freight most of the times with storm orders that those orders are tied to. We really try to make it easy on the distributor and thus easy on the utility that they're serving. There's a variety of ways we can do that. But yeah, it's all hands on deck. It's organizing orders. It's making sure the plant is aware that it's a storm order. And when they're made aware of it, that order jumps to the front of the line.
Mm-hmm. With our product mix, and the sales and marketing philosophy that PLP has utilized for years. We have to remember that the great majority, 95+% of the business that we conduct with power utilities is handled through distribution. So the distributors are a critical portion, critical link in that chain in terms of how the supply works. As Max mentioned, we try our absolute best to the point where we put our foot down and we say we're not going to expedite an existing order. If it's a storm order, you place a brand new order. It's identified from the outset as being a storm order, and that automatically also requires the use of expedited freight. We're not going to process a storm order and wait a couple days for an LTL truck to be available. So by delineating right up front, kind of establishing the rules and regulations and establishing a rubric, it allows us to be efficient, and everyone understands how the process works. It doesn't. It minimizes confusion that could result in delays in restoring the power system.
Mm-hmm. One of your questions earlier asked, how do we do things today, and how is that different than how they were back in the day? There are some lessons learned in there from decades of handling storms. We do things a little bit differently now than we did back in the day. But if we could go back to that real quick, Joe, there's a legendary story of one of our reps from Oklahoma coming in when it was all hands on deck and picking up product from Rogers in his personal pickup truck, right, and helping to deliver product to Oklahoma.
Exactly. And we have the ability to work around the system. A lot of it depends on freight availability. And in that case, our sales rep, like a lot of our reps, went above and beyond the call of duty to ensure that we were providing good service from start to finish through our distributor to the end user.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah, we have the ability to move quick. I mean, the goal is to do things the right way, the paperwork way, if you will. But, we're trying to solve problems. So if it comes to it, we're going to make product, we're going to shoot and ship product, and then we'll figure out the paperwork later.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about this word storm stock quite a bit. So what are some examples of those high runners, whether it's from a utility perspective that they're looking at or from our perspective?
Yeah. So if you go to either of our plants in Rogers and Albemarle, you'll see a storage area with racks and racks and racks of finished product and also work in progress that looks like a scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Some of that product in there is flagged for storm only. We keep storm-specific stock, and it's the high-running products, things like GDE 1107s, which are guy grip dead ends for 3/8-inch EHS. It's the most common guy grip dead end for the most common extra high-strength utility grade strand used in the U.S. Products like that, wrap lock ties for 1/0 conductor, again, very common construction, insulators, other ties, guy markers. You need those for common distribution construction. Just high-running distribution products in general. And probably some armor rods. I should mention 1/0 armor rods. Probably 4/0, 336, and maybe some common transmission items too. But it is mostly distribution focused.
That's what I was going to say. So we're talking, most of these storms are really affecting, it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts with the distribution network versus transmission, which tend to be a little bit more robust and less susceptible to damage, I guess. Is that correct?
That's fair.
It's pretty much true. The other thing that you find is that within distribution systems, there's more of a commonality. The more and more cases where utilities use the identical product from utility to utility. Most power utilities use 3/8-inch EHS strand. That requires the use of a GD 1107 or some other slightly different variant of that. It's easy for us to stock the products for those high-volume, common-type distribution applications. When you get to transmission, there's more variety in terms of how you skin a cat. And even within a single utility, you'll find multiple conductor sizes, multiple styles of construction, each of which require unique products that it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to lay on the shelf and put in an emergency storm stock. And it kind of ties into something you probably will get to at some point anyway, is the fact that unlike a lot of our peer companies, PLP doesn't rely extensively on third world offshore manufacturing for the bulk of our core products. They're manufactured domestically in our 3 plants. One of the shticks that I'll use in talking to customers or distributors is in a situation like this when we have a storm where, especially for some of our simpler products like a GDE or especially armor rods, we can take an order today, make them tonight, and ship them tomorrow. And if you've got an oddball size, it doesn't matter. We're going to make them anyway. And we have the infrastructure, we have the raw materials in place. It may be a function of doing a different equipment setup or something, but it's happening domestically. We don't have to ship it from Thailand or China or Brazil or India like some of our competitors do. And it's one of the reasons why we've had pretty good success in maintaining a solid market share in our product lines, is because we have that ability to respond. And among our jobs in the sales and marketing side is to emphasize that fact. You're doing business with an American company that has American factories, American workers, making the products and being able to turn around on the dime, basically, rather than waiting for a shipment to come in.
Mm-hmm. Right. So thinking about from a system perspective, what are the most common issues that these, utilities and line workers that are out there making these repairs, what are they dealing with most commonly? I think I read something that like vegetation is the number one issue here, that like 90% of outages are caused by, trees or some kind of vegetation issue. So what does that lead to, I guess? One is that, do you agree with that? And then what does that lead to in terms of issues?
Yeah, it's a variety of things. I know First Energy says that the number one cause of outages for them is vegetation management. So that's a combination of trees falling down or branches falling off of trees, or maybe big bushes encroaching distribution lines and causing outages. Yeah, I mean, it can be that, like in a lighter storm, it doesn't take a ton to knock a dead tree branch off and trip a line, or, take a dying tree down completely and knock down a line. So it could be that, in bigger storms like the microbursts and tornadoes that we had up here in Cleveland in early August. I mean, there were poles down, there were cross arms snapped. The damage was more catastrophic then. Mm-hmm. So it just depends what you're talking about. And obviously we're talking about overhead lines, so those are going to be more susceptible than lines that are underground, right, mm-hmm. for obvious reasons. Lines that are underground can still be susceptible to storm damage, specifically flooding.
Sure.
And building underground lines they have their own set of problems. But once they're in service, I would say in general they're less susceptible to storm damage than overhead lines are.
The alternate factor you have to consider, though, is that when damage does occur, flooding damage does occur in an underground system, the ability to find the individual problem and to remedy the problem is an order of magnitude more complicated and more expensive than if you see a broken wire and you fix it on an overhead application. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the lessons that's been learned. I remember reading some follow-up from some of the storms that have occurred at Centerpoint. The underground system was more robust. The underground system didn't suffer the level of damage on a percentage basis that the overhead system did, but fixing the problems was very complicated by comparison.
Sure.
The other type of storm that may not see as much foliage-related issues would be ice storms. And in terms of magnitude, and we've not had an ice storm that's really affected a widespread area in a little while, but when a bad ice storm occurs, it's just the weight of the ice that takes the lines down, and it doesn't matter whether there's any trees or not. You'll see rime ice buildup that may be 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and you throw in a little bit of wind on top of that, it's enough to break cross arms and in some cases break poles. Mm-hmm. I can remember some of the ice storms that have occurred in New England and in the Midwest where it just flattened everything. And this is in areas where there wasn't a tree to be seen.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And, of course, you got the infamous Texas ice storm, right, from 2021, I believe that was, early 2021.
Right. Yeah. And that was actually my next question was, we talk a lot about hurricanes, but what other kind of natural disasters or storms are we talking about? So obviously ice. A hot topic now is wildfires that is obviously grown in, an issue now, especially out west here in the U.S.
Yeah. It's a little bit of everything. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say all 50 states are susceptible to some sort of storm or natural type of disaster, right? Yeah, I mean, ice storms, fires, yes, that is the big topic out west right now. You know, grid hardening in general is a buzzword for, again, all utilities in all 50 states. Grid hardening out west right now means wildfire hardening. So, yeah, I mean, tornadoes, you know, microbursts like we had talked about, ice storms, tornadoes, blizzards. Did we hit them all?
I think so. And yeah, with regards to wildfires too, it's kind of interesting, and you can make the political case about global warming and how it's affected rainfall and temperatures and that sort of thing. There are wildfires occurring right now in the greater Boston and greater New York City areas. They're small in magnitude compared with what's happened out west, but the local municipalities, local governments don't have the wherewithal to fight those fires because they haven't occurred in the past. They don't have a system in place. And so far, those fires haven't impacted the electric system to the extent that it has out in the West Coast states. Because it's in rural, like national park, state park type areas. But people will be surprised at the level of wildfire damage that we're seeing. There's not a lot you can do to protect a line when a wildfire occurs. A lot of the work that's being done in terms of the system hardening, a lot of it at least, is to try to cut down on the opportunity or the chances of the electric system initiating a wildfire. So when we talk about system hardening, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You want to make the system as robust as possible to withstand a wildfire, but ultimately a big and I'd say a bigger part of the goal is to prevent the system from initiating a condition and possibly causing a wildfire.
Mm-hmm. So Joe, you've been in this game for a long time. What's the most devastating storm in terms of the system, destruction that it caused since you've been in the career?
Yeah, the biggest one that I was directly involved in part because of where I lived and what my responsibilities were at the time, was an ice storm that hit New England, I would say probably 25 or 26 years ago. And it affected northern New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and then the southern part of Canada and the east side. So a little bit of Ontario, a lot of Quebec. That was an ice storm, and it's one of those storms that flattened systems. It brought down Hydro-Quebec 745 kV lines. Entire towns were flattened just because of the huge buildup of ice that occurred on older power systems that hadn't really been attended to and kept up to standards. It was small towns, small diameter conductor, and storm restoration from that storm, I recall, probably went on for 2 solid months in some of the rural areas.
Wow.
In Maine, they were bringing line trucks in from Florida, from North Carolina to try to deal with the storm. And it created a different set of problems. They were turning some of the line trucks away because the tires didn't have enough tread. The linemen didn't have warm enough gear to be able to get out and work in that type of very cold environment.
Right. The other legendary one that I still hear stories about is Katrina. And I wasn't at PLP for Katrina, and I don't think it would have been in your territory. Was that in your territory?
Part of it impacted my territory because it got down into Texas.
Okay.
And it was the double-barreled Katrina and Rita. And it's a legendary from PLP's perspective. We knew that Katrina was going to be a big one. And in some cases in the big storms, it takes the utilities a while to figure out what they need to do. The storm has to pass in order for the line workers to get out and work safely to begin storm restoration. And they don't start filling the system up until they know what they need. But in the case of Katrina and Rita, I remember being here at PLP, we made the decision to begin running the factories 24/7 before we received the first storm order, because we knew what the utilities were going to need. Based on our history, based on the standards of the utilities that were affected, we knew what they were going to need before they knew what they were going to need. And we started running both plants 24/7 and did it for a period of months until we were finally able to get caught up.
Mm-hmm. So if utilities could only had the ability to stock one essential item for storm response, what would that be? What's most critical?
A PLP item or somebody else's item?
Both, I guess.
I would say in terms of just an item in general, it would be a 1-aught automatic splice, a product that's sold by a couple of our peer companies or competitors, depending on how you draw the line, but it allows for very fast splicing of typically smaller distribution conductors. Utilities will use them by the thousands to repair broken conductors.
Really? Okay.
And then in terms of PLP, Max mentioned the catalog number before, GD 1107. It's the guy grip dead end that's used for 3/8-inch EHS strand, which is by far the most common strand size. And it's used for down guying of poles. It's simple and easy to install. In an awful lot of cases, you can't put a pole up unless you've got a down guy, and the great majority of the down guys are held in place using a guy grip dead end.
Agree, Max?
Yeah, definitely agree with the GD 1107. Yeah, in terms of product outside of PLP, maybe cross arms. Like I said, in catastrophic storms, cross arms,
Poles.
poles would be good too. Poles and cross arms.
Okay.
With those being wooden, and any significant storm could easily snap a cross arm or break off an old wooden pole.
Some of it depends on the type of storm. If you have poles going down, you're going to need poles and cross arms. You're also going to need distribution transformers, because if a distribution transformer goes down, it has to be thoroughly checked out if it's any good at all before it can be put back up. It's almost like playing a game of dominoes where you knock over the first domino and then it just plows down from there. I've been involved in storms where single-phase disconnect switches were important to do emergency sectionalization of systems. They just put switches up where they really don't need them, but they're useful to have them in place to perform sectionalization and allow the workers to work safely in order to restore the entire system. Going back to one of your first questions was who takes the responsibility on the ground level. A big part of this is obviously manpower. In the case of the larger utilities, it's the utility themselves who marshals the manpower. They bring people from unaffected parts of their system. They bring line crews in from affiliated utilities, but it's the host utility that does the dirty work in terms of lining everyone up and getting them to work efficiently. And it's a big problem, and it requires a lot of coordination. In some of the more recent storms, I think it was with Helene, there's a picture that was sort of viral. I think it was taken from a drone, but it showed the middle of a big field, and there were hundreds and hundreds of line trucks lined up. That's great, except those line trucks are not performing anything useful as long as they're sitting in the field. They've got to be dispatched out into the system and put to work in a safe, efficient manner. And it's the host utility that's responsible for ensuring that that happens. We also have to remember that despite the fact that to a layman all these systems look the same, they're not. There's construction practices, there's materials that really can vary quite a bit from a utility to utility basis. So you just can't pick up a line crew from Ohio, send them to another state, and expect them to construct using that utility, the affected utility's construction practices. And it's the responsibility of that home utility to send out supervisors or managers or someone to oversee the work to ensure that it's performed to their standards. And then ultimately, line work is a dangerous job. You have to follow very important safety procedures. It doesn't matter whether it's the primary or the secondary. They're equally dangerous. And there are grounding practices that have to be followed. There are sectionalizing practices that have to be followed. Again, everybody is responsible for their own work too, but it's the host utility that has to take the lead to ensure that it's all handled and coordinated properly.
Well, that actually leads perfectly into my next question, which was we're dealing with highly regulated industries and companies that have their own specifications and stuff like that. Is that all still in place during storms, or is that kind of like we need to lax that a little bit to get things done, or is it to a T still?
I think to a large percentage when it comes to safety, all those procedures are followed. The risk is just too great. When it comes to standards, there are some cases where standards can be loosened depending on material availability, depending on how complicated things are handled. You might do something using a simpler practice in order to get the system up and running more efficiently. Again, it's the host utility that's responsible for coordinating that, because ultimately they're responsible for when everybody packs up and heads back home.
The way the utilities can share and borrow line crews in a time of need, like Joe said, is impressive. And I get that there's operations and rules they have to follow, but some of the pictures and some of the stories about other utilities traveling the country to go help with ice storms in Texas or hurricanes in Florida is pretty impressive. And then in return, again, going back to First Energy's microburst that we had in early August, line crews from Indiana and from elsewhere in the country came to help out First Energy. So it's pretty neat how they're able to reciprocate help.
Yeah.
And then you have contractors too, like Quanta and Maztec, that I'm sure are on top of having crews available for things like storm response.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting too. We see contractors going everywhere, and it's always funny. I have a 20-mile plus commute to work, and after a storm, a couple days after the storm has passed, you'll see the contractor trucks all headed back to wherever home base is. But when it comes to mutual aid, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, within the utility industry, like utilities help out their like utilities. So, for example, investor-owned utilities, they'll reach out to contractors, and their partners in a storm will be other investor-owned utilities. If a damage occurs at co-ops, they'll reach out to contractors, and a lot of the out-of-state crews will be from other co-ops. Same thing with municipal utilities. I live in a community that has a municipal utility, and a couple of crews were sent down to Florida to help out another municipal utility that had significant outages. So it's interesting. There are organizations. It's the NRECA for the co-ops. It's the APPA for municipal utilities. In some cases, they'll work within their specific utility organization to help reach out and get this extra help when it's needed.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to end on a fun note here. Have you guys heard of the Waffle House Index? Either one of you, how it relates to storms?
No.
Joe?
I'm somewhat familiar with it.
Okay, so apparently this is like a semi-legitimate thing that Waffle House puts out when there's a storm coming, because they show how many Waffle Houses are open, and they classify them. So they have like a green, which means they're serving a full menu. So the restaurant has sustained little or no damage. They have a yellow, and this is like they have like a whole map and like operation center is crazy. Yellow means they have a limited menu. So the restaurant is running out of food or has limited power. Mm-hmm. And the red means it's closed completely, because I think it was some FEMA administrator says if the Waffle House is closed, like it's pretty bad.
Then it's bad.
Yes,
Okay.
Exactly. So have you guys been to Waffle House?
I love Waffle House.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe?
I've been there. I don't love it.
Okay. Okay. So best item at a Waffle House, what would you order?
Grand Slam.
Okay.
Waffle.
A waffle? Okay. All right. I think I'd have to go with the All-Star Special or, maybe a Texas Melt.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Texas Melts are good. I've had it all there. I've had omelets. I've had.
It's a good hangover, place.
It's a good everything, yeah.
So my experience with Waffle Houses are mostly based years ago, before they passed no smoking regulations. And back in the day, at least, when you walked in a Waffle House, you opened the door and you were overwhelmed with cigarette smoke. There was no such thing as a non-smoking section in a Waffle House until it was mandated by the local or federal government. Mm-hmm. So it was one of the reasons why I always stayed away. I'm not a big fan of cigarette smoke, but the few times that I went, I just remember this overwhelming cigarette smoke smell. I imagine in some of the older Waffle Houses, it's still hanging around.
Yeah.
So, do you know Krispy Kreme does something similar? It's not like that, but do you know that? Every Krispy Kreme has an LED light in the color that it's a big, Krispy Kreme logo, and the color of the light means something. So, I believe green means you get a free donut. If you're driving by and the sign's green, you can go in and get a donut. If it's red, I believe that means they just made donuts, so they're hot and ready. And then white is neutral.
Wow, I did not know this.
Go, look it up
Okay,
and
I'm gonna have to
fact
look it
check that. I believe I got the color sequence right, but yeah, it's like neutral, hot and ready, and then hey, come by and grab a donut. That probably means that they've been sitting for a while.
Got a lot of shout outs in this podcast. We got Waffle House, Krispy Kreme, United, you know. All right. Joe, best podcast ever?
Absolutely. It's the absolute best podcast I've ever been on.
First, but not the last.
Well, we'll see. Probably, though.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. And stay tuned to more Connecting the Lines.